Hey everybody, and welcome to the Startup Savant podcast. I'm your host, Ethan, and this is a show about the stories, challenges, and triumphs of fast-scaling startups and the founders who run them. Our guests on the show today are Antoine Carossio and Tristan Kalos, co-founders of 𝗴𝘂𝗂𝘁. 𝗴𝘂𝗂𝘁 is a cybersecurity company built to secure APIs, and I'm going to let them explain that a lot further because I'm already getting pretty close to my technical depth. But don't worry, because we're not going to break anyone's brain with fancy developer talk. There's a lot to learn from the business side of this business, and we're going to see if we can pull everything out on that side. But before we begin, if you're a longtime listener, then you know that we are working towards a goal of 100 reviews by episode number 100. And if you're a new listener, well, now you know. Either way, if you're enjoying the show, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. As always, we appreciate you listening. But enough about that. Let's jump into this discussion with Antoine and Tristan of 𝗴𝘂𝗂𝘁. Hey guys, how are you doing today?
Hey Ethan, we are glad to be here. Very excited about speaking today. We are in San Francisco right now, and the weather is super sunny, so it's a good day.
Awesome. Well, we've got some sun here in Ann Arbor as well, and I'm going to just take that as a win and move forward. So normally I start out by asking what the company is, but I want to know how you two came together to become co-founders before we jump into the company stuff.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and usually Tristan likes answering this one. So Tristan, I'll let you go.
So basically, originally I'm an engineer. I was a developer, and when I was like 20 years old, I started working for companies here in the Bay Area. I was building applications for them. And one day, one of my customers, he called me and he told me, Tristan, I don't get it. The application that you created for me, it's not working anymore. So I investigated the problem and I found that the database of the application was empty, completely empty.
Whoa.
And there was only one single message inside of it. It was, do not worry, your data is safe. In order to get it back, pay 10 Bitcoins to this address.
Ooh.
So it got hacked. So as a developer, I didn't know actually how to secure what I was building. I realized that, and it was a tough realization for me. So fast forward 3 years, we were in MBA at Berkeley here in California, and I met with Antoine, who was an expert in cybersecurity. He was working at Apple previously. And I saw that he had the knowledge necessary to help me with securing the applications that I was building. So we decided to solve this problem at scale together. And we both wanted to create a company. And here is 𝗴𝘂𝗂𝘁𝗂𝘁.
Yeah, that's it. And I have to precise that I'm not the one who hacked Tristan's application 3 years earlier. But I could have been in my earlier days.
I knew it.
Do you have a way to prove that?
No.
Yeah, just he'll show us his Bitcoin wallet and there will not be 10 Bitcoin in there. All right. So I think you've began answering this question a little bit, but tell us, what is 𝗴𝘂𝗂𝘁 and what is 𝗴𝘂𝘂𝗁 meant to do?
Of course, so maybe I can answer that. But as Tristan said, when you are a developer, you are not a security expert, and especially you don't understand how to secure your API. So the API basically is the communication layer between your application and the database. So all your customers' data and so on, they have to go through the API and they finally reach the database. So the API is a really sensitive layer in your application stack. And as a developer, you have to create an app, you have to deliver it fast to your customers. And what usually happens is that every 6 months or every year, you are audited by professional or ethical hackers, by pen testers. And they try to hack your application through bug bounty programs, for example, or through audits. And they find vulnerabilities in your app, they report them to you, and you have to fix them. The problem is that during 6 months, during 1 year maybe, you could leave some vulnerabilities into the wild, into your production, and so all the customers' data are unsafe at that point. And the problem we are trying to solve is that we want that a developer is now enabled to fix his vulnerabilities by his own, to understand why they are important and why they matter, how to fix them, and to fix them as early as possible in the development process. So it means every time as a developer you update your application, you're able to look for vulnerabilities, to find and fix vulnerabilities using Escape into your API.
Gotcha. So this is basically a product that that continually tests the APIs of your clients to make sure that there are not vulnerabilities. Is that a fairly accurate statement?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So I know you guys have done some really interesting things on scanning public APIs and, of course, working with your clients' APIs. How big of a problem is this APIs not being secure issue?
It's absolutely critical. We were actually very surprised by how vulnerable the APIs are for every company. So APIs, as Antoine said, are like the cornerstone of a data pipeline in the internet. They represent 83% of the global web traffic. I don't know if you imagine what is that.
Wow.
And yet we discovered that 91%, more than 90% of them are critically vulnerable to hackers. And it happens like all the time. Like a few weeks ago, Loom, you probably know about Loom,
Yep.
the video startup. So they had a problem with APIs, and that led some customers to access the private videos of other customers, which is indeed a big problem.
Yes.
And so those kind of security incidents happen every week, every day, and they can lead to a huge cost and a huge damage for companies, especially from a reputational standpoint. So APIs before were often overlooked as, a part of the IT system, subset of the security. But now APIs are seen more and more as the real interface between a company and the exterior, where all the data flows. So yeah, the problem is becoming very important for everyone. And the reality that all APIs are vulnerable is getting seen now.
Okay, so it's a big problem, and whenever the problem happens, it sounds like it's pretty darn serious stuff. And especially with these larger companies that are sending tons and tons and tons of data through their systems to other large companies, and I assume that the vulnerabilities can really go both ways, from the sending and the receiving side. So yeah, it sounds to me like this is a massive problem that needs a good solution. So I'm glad that you guys are fixing this for all of us people who are just trying to build stuff.
Absolutely.
So speaking about building stuff, the product you guys have is very specific. It's a very specific product, and it's built around a very specific use case. But of course, it seems like almost all companies use some sort of API nowadays. So how did you think about the size of the addressable market as you developed this idea into a business?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are different things here. The size of the market that we're tackling today is evaluated at $6 billion by the market studies. It's the application security market. And it's growing at more than 20% per year. So it's quite a huge growth right now because everyone is developing apps or web applications or APIs. But what we think is it's actually even larger than that. And we think about this because we evaluated the amount of developers that are building applications. And what we have seen is most of them actually have not implemented security mechanism yet. Why? Well, because the existing solutions are not satisfactory. They are painful to use. And our goal is to empower all developers, to democratize, to make security available to all developers. And if all developers today were equipped by security solutions for protecting what they're building, the market would more be $10 billion as of today than 6. So the market penetration of security testing tool is not very high yet.
So I assume that that to build a product like this, you have the idea, but you don't just build it and then go live the next day. that would be probably really a lot of wishful thinking. But since the world is the real world, can you walk us through your research and development process?
Yes. So, of course, you might wonder why such a product does not exist already. And in fact, the reason for that is that it was a really hard challenge technically to solve. It happens that the current solution, they were not smart enough to be able to discover vulnerabilities in APIs for the following reasons. They were doing some very, what is called brute force strategy. And therefore, they could not understand how the API works and understand the business logic behind an API. Okay. So in fact, the previous solution, they were not able to test in depth an API as a human hacker would have been able to do. So from a technical point of view, it was a huge challenge. And when we started to think about this topic with Tristan, it was in 2020. And we just saw that there was one research paper about the ability to generate legitimate traffic on an API in order to discover vulnerabilities. It's a research paper that was published by Microsoft. The problem at that time is that the execution duration of a security test by this algorithm built by Microsoft took roughly 1 day to execute. So this is quite long actually, and this is not compatible with the developer's needs, because a developer he updates his app multiple times a day, so he has to be able to run a new security scan, I will say, very fast. That's why we hired some really good mathematicians and engineers in France in order to improve this concept developed by Microsoft originally, and we reduced the scan duration from roughly 1 day to a few minutes, even 1 minute in the best case scenario.
Wow.
Which enables us to make this solution actionable and profitable for developers. So it took us 1.5 years of R&D with 4 people, and it was quite intense to work on this, and really fascinating from a tech point of view.
Okay, so you mentioned something really interesting here. So you said that this kind of idea for this, what turned into the business of Escape, you kind of got from reading a research paper that was published by Microsoft. Is that correct?
Yes.
So were you out looking for this type of research, or do you just read research papers every day for fun, or what led you to this paper that gave you this idea?
Maybe Tristan, you can answer this one.
Well, I read papers for fun. Joke apart. So we were researching actually, like when you start a technical topic and you want to build a company in a very tech like industry, you have to research about the state of the art, like what have people done before, what has worked, what has not worked. And generally, when you're building a startup, you arrive with a fresh point of view on the matter. So you're more ambitious than the actual state of the art. Like you want to try new things. So we have seen that. We were doing research. We saw this paper, and we're like, 24 hours for finding security flows. It's not suitable for production. Like nobody's going to use that. Nobody wants to click on a button and wait 24 hours to have a result. Like this is not the 80s anymore.
Right.
So we said, okay, let's accelerate that. And we wanted to accelerate it to the point that it will be very easy for any developer to integrate into his development process, which is less than 1 minute. And I mean, we didn't know back then how hard it would be to get to that result. But this is also one of the reasons why we did it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that was my next question is if you knew how hard it was going to be, would you have taken this bet? And it sounds like maybe not.
I would have built a CRM.
Okay, yeah, that was my next question was so it sounds like you built this business off of this kind of problem that you saw. You found a paper that kind of gave you the solution, but do you feel like either one or both of you, if you hadn't been solving this problem, do you feel like you would have gone and built a different business, or do you think that this idea was just so strong, just stuck with you so much that you had to build a business around it?
I would say that on my end, this is exactly the kind of business that I wanted to start with, mostly because it's a very technical topic. It echoes something that I lived myself, problems that I had. And there is also a strong business need for security. The consequences of a security incident, of a data leak, are huge. So solving a real world business problem that you experience yourself, and by making new technology, like improving the technology, is exactly what I wanted, is exactly what I dreamed of when building my first company.
I can say better than Tristan's. That's exactly that. We wanted something that was very deep from a technical point of view and that solved a real world problem, not only for developers, in fact, but for everyone who is using a website or an application on his phone. So I agree with Tristan. We are proud of working on this topic.
It seems like something you could be proud of, and I know that when you're building a business like this, things aren't always up and to the right. You know, even if you're kind of one of the only games in town, if you're the only business trying to solve this problem, it doesn't still mean that success is a definite thing. So what was the biggest challenge that you faced while you've been building and scaling Escape?
I think like the challenge is when you are building a startup, the challenges are always evolving. Like your role is basically solving the biggest challenge that your company has now at every moment in time. So the challenge evolves. Like first, you have to recruit the right people,
right,
which is a challenge per se. So we needed time to select the right team, and we were pretty successful at that. The team is working extremely well, and they're insanely good people. And then you have to fix the tech. So there is a huge part of, trying things that do not work, R&D, shipping something to customers that does not work, and fixing it after. And after you fix that, then you have to, nail the delivery. Right. The distribution to customers. And that's where we are now.
The thing currently that we face, one big challenge that we are working on what is called shift-left security, which means we are bringing security more to the developer side and earlier in the development process of an application. And as I said, developers are usually not educated about security. So that's quite a big challenge to educate the developers to use such a solution and to make them responsible for security, which is completely fine. And with the new agile development methods where developer is more and more involved in the security process. But for API, it's kind of something new too. And there is a huge challenge of educating developers and companies and even security teams about this topic. So
aside from using Escape, obviously we want everyone who wants a secure API to call you guys up and use your product. But aside from using Escape, are there any really simple methods that companies and developers can use to secure their APIs at least better than a completely unsecured API?
Unfortunately, not really.
Perfect. All right. So then you heard him, everybody. Let's call up Escape and figure it out, because we're all gonna run out of Bitcoin if we all have to pay that.
Now, of course, there are some technical best practices, but the hardest thing is to make people aware they exist and to make sure the developers implement them, because and this is our world at Escape, basically. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. So you guys mentioned team. And we chatted actually a couple of days ago before this call, and something that you mentioned that you guys are exceptional about is hiring great engineers. Can you walk us through your strategy and your actual process when you're out hiring engineers?
Tristan.
Yeah, of course. So to be first we do try to find the right channels for selecting people. So you have to find the places where the people that code since they are 12 and they're passionate and code day and night are actually, taking a good living. And once you find them, you post the offers and you have to select the right people. So we do a first step of screening, which is a series of coding tests. And every coding test has a benchmark, and we select only the top 1% of the benchmarking.
Yeah.
So it's a very short test. We don't want to take them too much time. It's 30-minute test. And then we select only the top 1%. And then you have the interviews with Antoine, mostly, to discuss about what are their ambitions, why do they want to join Escape and work on such awesome topics. And then there is a second coding challenge, which is 5 hours long.
Okay.
And it's more in-depth technical. And it allows us to see really not only if they know how to code, but if they have creative minds and if they are problem solvers.
Yes.
And with this process, we never missed. So are these tests something that you are developing, or are these tests that exist out there that are kind of standardized that you can just use in your process?
The first test Tristan talked about is standardized. The second one of 5 hours, we built it, or we got inspired by some tests we had in our careers before, I would say. And just there is something that is interesting too in the way we hire people, is that we come from top-ranked engineering school in France, so we have a strong network in those schools. And Escape in France is it starts to be known in the schools, and so we leverage our network in order to find the best candidates in our engineering school in France. And the cool thing there is that usually people who are really good at computer science, they are also really good at mathematics, which matters a lot in what we are doing because there are a lot of algorithms and optimizations to do. So this is a bit the story before screening and challenges and so on.
I think there is something interesting to know here about the people we recruit. So from what we have seen, the best people, they come from 2 different channels. In France, as Antoine said, we had the equivalent of the Ivy League. So a group of best universities, very hard to enter. The people are very good at math and physics and computer science. So we recruit people from there. And we have seen that the people that actually get it to the team, that make it to the team, are either from those best universities. So very, academic, very strong at math, or completely random people that just, arrived, that come out of nowhere and were just not going to school, but coding all day, all night, and got super good at it. So you really have 2 kind of profiles, like the academic ones and, the self-taught nerd that is super, super efficient at coding and very creative. I think the combination of both is very good for the team.
Do you find that those 2 groups of people work well together, or do they clash because of their differences in how they go about accomplishing things?
I think they work very well together. And I was actually very surprised by the way they collaborate, even from different point of views and different ideas. And they each have their, strong points. They strengths and their weaknesses, and they know about them. So they collaborate together in order to make the best outcome. It's been very, very fruitful for Escape.
All right. So you guys are obviously very technical yourselves, and you're hiring a lot of technical folks. Do you have anybody on the team who is non-technical, whether that be like a sales or marketing or anything of that nature?
Yeah, we are currently hiring, mostly in the business part. There is somebody at Escape, Patrick, who is responsible for everything that is more related to the operational stuff. So not business directly. And recruiting in marketing and sales is one of our priorities right now. But for now, we handle the business part ourselves.
So did you use the same process to hire this non-technical person? Obviously, they didn't have to take the technical test. They probably wouldn't have been in the top 1%, just guessing. What was the process that you went through to hire this non-technical person?
It's very different. When you are hiring engineers, you have an actual quantitative way of taking a first look at if they're good or not, if they know how to code. When you're hiring business people, it's more on the interpersonal side of the things. Like, you need to talk with them, you need to spend time with them, you need to have a coffee with them to understand why they're joining the company and if they will really push through. So the process takes a lot more effort from a personal point of view. And also, you never know if it will work before the person actually comes into the company and start working with you for long. So you cannot know beforehand. You will have to make mistakes when hiring business people, and you will have to try to work with them and see if that goes well.
Well, I hope that the mistakes that you all end up making, because it's inevitable, are simple to fix and don't break anything in any major way.
Nothing is unfixable in a startup.
Oh, I love that. All right. That's going up on my wall. I'm going to write that up on the wall. Thanks for that. All right, let's move to marketing. Again, in the profile, and folks, if you want to find their profile, you can find that over at startupsavant.com/podcast. That's where we're going to put all of the stuff. But in their profile, they mention getting your first 100 customers through inbound channels. And that's pretty wild, because normally we hear founders that are giving the story about how they hit the phones, or they knocked on doors, or they had an in with some company, and that's how they got their first customers. But you guys are having people call you. How did you do this?
So first, it doesn't mean that we have not been on the phone. I remember sleepless nights calling people in the US from France or people in New Zealand, and the time difference is absolutely horrible for having call. So we when you're building a startup, you do whatever it takes, right? You call, you send emails, you outreach, you do everything. But what has worked absolutely very well for us, and I encourage every other startup to take a look at it, because really it's exceptional, is creating content, good quality content, and sharing it in the right groups. So for developers, it's Reddit, it's dev.to, it's Hacker News, all those platforms where all the developers are spending their days. We published our content there. We had a huge content strategy from day one, and this got us an insane amount of inbound leads. They just came by themselves to Escape.
In order to to create good quality content, especially for technical people and developers, we really encourage you to leverage your technical team. You can block in their schedule one day every 2 or 3 weeks in order to write a good article about something they are passionate about. And those kind of articles were absolute bangers. It worked quite well. So you can use your technical team in order to do marketing, and that's really what worked well at Escape.
All right, I think we're going to hit on something here, because I'm pretty passionate about content and creating excellent content and content marketing in general. So is this your main strategy? This essentially like content marketing, technical blogging strategy? Is this kind of your main marketing piece?
Yeah, definitely. And as Antoine said, we had a process for it. Like we leveraged the technical team in order to do marketing. This is also why we don't have more marketing people at Escape, because we leverage the tech team in order to build the content strategy. So every 3 weeks, we block one day and we tell the engineers, hey, can you write a blog post about the exciting stuff that you've built in the last 3 weeks? And they do it, and they're happy to do it, obviously, because they love what we're doing. And so we get about 10 articles, and then we can publish them over the next weeks. And we have a list of where we need to publish them, the communities that could be interested into each topic. And it has worked really well for us.
Okay, so this was a question that I was going to ask is like, how do you know what content to create? But you've kind of answered that in every 3 weeks. Hey, you engineer guy, go write an article about the cool thing that you did, which is interesting, except that there's a lot of stuff. And I'm sure in 3 weeks' time, they've probably worked on, 100 to 900 different things. How do you help them choose which things to write about that are going to get people interested in what you have to say?
We have like a document where we put all the ideas for articles, and the ideas can come from us, the founders. Like we analyzed the keywords that were researched by our audience, or the questions that needs to be answered, so we propose articles on those topics, or it can come from the technical team themselves, and then we validate it. So we say, hey, this makes sense according to our strategy, so you can go for it. There is kind of a collaboration here for generating the right content.
So you're starting with ideas that either come from you or from the developers yourselves, and then you're checking those against the keyword, like using keyword tools like Ahrefs or all the other keyword tools.
Exactly.
Okay. And then how do you know that what they write is going to, I mean, obviously it's going to get traffic if you're using the right keywords and putting it into the right places. But how do you know that the actual documents that they write are good enough to be put out to the world? I mean, is there a big editing process, or how do you go from an engineer wrote this to finished blog post?
Basically, we go through their blog post when they write it, and we are developers and engineers too. And so if we find the article is really interesting and well written, we will see that right away. So there is a lot of feeling here too, I would say. Obviously, you quoted Ahrefs. So you can also check if from an SEO point of view, the article is written properly. You can use Grammarly in order to correct some sentences and formulations in order to make them more attractive. But basically, when reading the result, the output from a developer, if we find it is interesting, it should work among the community, because we are part of this community too.
That makes total sense. Okay, so you've got this list of ideas. First off, I love that. If anybody is interested in doing content, yes, make yourself that list of just like titles or whatever. That is such a great place to start, because blank page syndrome is a real thing. So you've got this list of titles, and you are every 3 weeks you're blocking out a developer's time to go and write one of these articles. You're checking that against Ahrefs. You're using tools again like Ahrefs and Grammarly to ensure that the writing is good. Now you have a completed article in a Google Doc or something like that. So are you putting this on your website's blog, or are you posting it on in a Substack or on LinkedIn, or where does this article go, and then what's the kind of marketing strategy around the article itself?
What is quite specific and interesting here is that we have a process for publishing articles, and the person that wrote the article has a huge responsibility in making it to the social networks and so on. So first, once you wrote an article, you have to create, a banner for it. So we have guidelines for creating banners, and it's the responsibility of the person that wrote the articles to actually create the banner. So we are transforming engineers into designers, which is very specific to Escape, and nobody does that. Okay, sometimes I get help, but generally we do it like that. And then there is as I said, there is kind of a checklist of where we need to publish it. And generally we do publish the link with a text description and not the full blog post, except on several platforms that are very specific to developers, like dev.to. So those kind of platforms, we publish the full blog post with a link back to our blog saying, hey, it's nicer to read it on the main blog. But on the other social networks, we publish a text, the image, and the link to the blog.
Okay.
Yeah, which means that we publish those articles to our blog first.
Yes,
So
it's
they are
always
the
on the blog first.
Yes, and there are people that are in the mailing list of the blog who receive the article, and we also publish the link on other media. And also, I think it could be interesting, but we also do some guest blog posts on other platforms. For example, yesterday we got one of our article published on the Postman blog. So this is really cool to work with talented teams such as Postman team. And obviously this gives us a backlink too, which is really interesting for us. But this gives Escape a lot of visibility. And for us, it's really cool to work with such teams, and we are honored to work with Postman, for example, to publish.
So when you publish a post on someone else's website, like this Postman, is this a blog post that you have already posted on your site, or is this okay? So this is a brand new post, and you have communicated with the team over at that website, at that business, to put your stuff up on their site, correct?
Yes, to be honest, it happens that the last blog post we published on Postman blog, they asked us to write it because they are on our Discord. We have a Discord community that everyone can join, and there is quite a few people from the Postman team, and they just contacted us through Discord. Hey, can you write an article about so a very specific topic related to APIs and security? And we say, yeah, sure, it would be nice. So I started writing, and we were in contact with their publishers the people responsible for marketing. We've done a few exchanges, and the total process from when they started asking for a specific blog post and when it was published was quite short. I think it was 2 weeks and a half, 3 weeks maybe.
Okay.
Which is not that long, knowing that Postman is a huge company. So the process was really smooth, and this is how we got the last one. The previous one was a bit different process, but this is how we build trust with them, and that's really cool to have this possibility to work with them.
All right, so I know that this is a really, really specific question, but you guys have this Discord community. I know Discord is really popular in the the kind of engineering space. What do you think the draw was to have this person or this team, several people from the Postman, join your Discord server?
I think it was from events mostly at the beginning.
You're right.
So we went. I mean. Okay, when you start a startup, you're starting from scratch and nobody knows you, right? Nobody even knows about you. So you have to start somewhere. And the way we started is we did research. So we wanted to show the research to the world. So we started attending events and presented what we found to the community. Hey, we found those vulnerabilities. And that's how we met people. And when we met people in person, we said, hey, let's keep in touch. So join the community and let's discuss there. And that's how we got teams from companies like Postman to join the Discord originally. And now people are reaching to us inbound. They are joining the community inbound because they see talking about it on the blog post or the social networks.
Gotcha. So you did some events. You met people. They were interesting. They thought you were interesting, and you said, "Hey, join the Discord." And then out of that, you got a guest post. You got a backlink. You got more visibility. That's a pretty darn good strategy to me. It feels like you're able to leverage meeting one person into an ongoing relationship, but not necessarily just with you, but with the rest of the community around it using that Discord server. That sounds to me like something that lots of different businesses could do. Yeah. Is this something you recommend other businesses do?
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
To be honest, at the beginning, we did not really do that on purpose. It was just because it happens like it happened. We really get on well with the Postman team at one of the event. They joined the Discord. They added some of their mates, colleagues, and this is how it started. Yeah.
Has anything else cool happened from this Discord server?
Yeah, we do have people from cool team from Redwood GS, I believe, from Neo4j, from cool companies, or also good open source, really impressive open source contributors are in the Discord server too, such as Nikita Stumpin from 𝗴𝘂𝗲𝘁 and so on. Yeah, it happens. Cool things.
Awesome. Sweet. All right. So I've asked about as many questions as I can about communities and content. But I will echo your advice. Companies should invest in content starting from day one. It's especially if it's evergreen content, content that isn't about what happened in the news this week, but it's about things that are useful now and will be useful into the future. And it's a do it once and receive benefits forever type of strategy. So I love that you guys brought that up. And I love to see that you're actually doing it correctly. It's really cool.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to ask this question to both of you. And I'm going to start with Antoine. What is your number one piece of advice for early stage entrepreneurs?
Oh, I should have thought about this before. I would say, okay, I would say you have to be passionate about what you're doing, because you have to, sometimes it's going to be super hard, and you have to know in advance that you are not going to drop your project. So in order to not drop your project, you have to believe in it and to be passionate about it. If you're not passionate about what you're doing, maybe you can do a great business, but provided it is a really, really, really easy business. So I don't know an easy business, but maybe there are some. But yeah, being passionate about what you're doing, to know you won't drop at the first problem you encounter.
All right. Tristan, same question. What is your number one piece of advice for early stage entrepreneurs?
Well, I absolutely agree on the passion thing. I think being excited about the problem that you're solving, about how to solve it, about who you're solving it for, is really important. And I think another thing, what's really important is also who you are doing it with. So picking the right people, we talked a lot about the team, but talking about your co-founders as well is very important. And I think we did a pretty good job on that part. I'm happy about it. So that is really important. And it would not have been the same if we were not together with Antoine on that project.
Well, you guys seem like a good team, so I'm glad to have both of you here.
Yeah.
All right. What are we going to see out of Escape? What's coming up? What's next?
Well, we're entering the scale phase right now with Escape. So there are a lot of stuff ongoing, and especially when you're a startup and you start, going out of the, trying to find out what your product is and what your audience is, then you have to reach larger companies, move towards mid-market and enterprise. And that's a whole different story. So this is probably what you're going to hear about in the coming months, like Escape becoming, going from a small startup to a company that has the power to address the need from larger enterprises.
Awesome. Cool. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I've got one last question for you. This one's easy, I tell you. Where can people connect with you online, and how can our listeners support Escape?
You can find us on the website, escape.tech. We are also very present on LinkedIn and Twitter. And sorry, what was the second part?
How can our listeners support Escape?
Join the Discord community.
And add us on LinkedIn. and follow the Escape page on LinkedIn too.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Definitely.
Well, folks, you know what? I'm also going to shout out your blog. If anybody's looking for an example of a well-run blog, go check it out. And we're going to put links to that, to the LinkedIn, to the Discord. We're going to put links to everything you guys heard today in the show notes over at startupsavant.com/podcast. And do you guys have any last words before we say goodbye for the day?
I would say that staying motivated is the key. And so continue pushing forward, everyone.
Yeah. Stay hungry, stay foolish.
All right, that's going to be it for this week's episode of the Startup Savant podcast. Thanks for joining us. Hey, if you haven't already heard, we've got full-length videos of all of our episodes over on the YouTube channel. So if you're a fan of watching and listening, well, then I recommend you go check that out. We'll be back next Wednesday morning with another episode of the Startup Savant podcast. We will see you bright and early. And until then, go build something beautiful.
The Startup Savant podcast is produced by Truick.